Hey, welcome to Info Gamer. Today we are going to be talking about the item pickups, and we're going to be showing you how to put them in Unity and how to code them.
Cool. Item pickups are always important. Every single game's got them. So let's do it.
So here we are at our workstation and we have Unity open because we're going to talk about item pickups in this lesson. But as we said earlier, this video is going to be a little bit different than the videos that we've put out previously. And the reason for that is because over the weekend I spent a little time and went ahead and created all the item pickups that we need for our Doodle Jump game. And so this video isn't going to follow the same tutorial format that we've done previously, where we've been creating the game together and we've been showing you the process of creating it. Instead, we're going to show you each of the item pickups that we've already created and talk about how you can go about creating it yourself. So in this video we'll talk about the spring and the trampoline, and in the next video we'll show you the propeller hat, the rocket pack or the jet pack, and the shield. So to start with, we'll show you the spring. And so I've gone ahead and created the prefab that we need for it. So under our prefabs folder, I have it right here, and I'm going to drag it into our scene view, put it off to the side so that you can see the difference between when our character lands on the platform or when he lands on the spring. So I'll go ahead and play it so you can see what I've created. So we've shown you how to create this function. It's the jump function, where our character lands on the platform and then he jumps up to the center of our screen and has a little bit of hang time, and then his gravity turns back on. So let's go ahead and show you what happens when he lands on the spring. So I'll move him over, and then as he lands on the spring, it does basically the same thing as the jump function. The only difference is that there's a little more hang time with the spring before he starts falling. And so to create the spring, we first want to start by creating a sprite. And so we'll go through the same process that we've shown you in previous videos, where you go to game object and then you go to 2D object and sprite. So once you click on that, it'll create a new sprite, and then you'll want to rename it. So I called it spring, and you also want to add a tag. So we've shown you before how to create tags. You go under add tag and then click this plus sign and then type it in, and once you have it typed in, you'll go back to your object and select the tag that you want. The next thing that you'll want to do is select your image. So you'll go to your sprites folder, find your sprite sheet, and then the spring image that you've drawn, and drag it into this field here. Once you've done that, you'll probably want to scale it depending on how big you drew your image. We had to scale it down a little bit, and 2.5 was the right size for us. But it might be a little bit different for you. Now our components are a little bit out of order. We can change that by just clicking on this and say move up, and then hit apply. And so next you'll want to add a box collider 2D, and so we've done that before as well, and that's under add component physics 2D box collider, and it should come up with the correct size. But if you don't like the size that it defaults, depending on how much space, white space you have around your image, you might need to size it or offset it a little bit. Then you also want to make sure that is trigger is selected, so you check that box right there. Now the next thing that we'll need to do is create some animations for our spring. Now normally I like using the legacy format of animations and the animation component, but because we're changing the sprite image of our spring, we have to use what's called the animator component. And so you don't actually have to add the animator component, because it will automatically add it to your object when you create an animation for it if you don't currently have either an animator component or an animation component selected. And so to do that, you'll go to Window and then Animation, and it'll bring up this window here, and you'll need to create a new animation. So to do that, you'll just click on this button here, and then it will bring up a new window where you get to browse for the file location of where you want to save your animation. So the only thing to remember with that is that you want to make sure that you're saving it to your animation folder, and then the first animation that we'll be creating you want to call idle, or idle spring. As you can see, this is the animation that we created. Now idle spring will be the default animation that our animator component will play through while nothing's happening. And so to create this animation, you can change your sample rate to just 1 because we're only going to have one image in it. And so it'll play through this animation every second at 1 frame per second. Then you'll want to click on the same sprite image that you used for your spring in the sprite renderer, not the other image that we've drawn, and just drag it into your animation timeline. Once you've done that, your idle sprite animation is complete. Now we need to create the animation for when your character bounces on the spring. And so we've gone ahead and created a new animation called Spring Bounce. But if you haven't created this yet, you'll need to go to Create New Clip. And once you click on this, that same window will appear, and then you'll just want to make sure that you save it in your animation folder. But we'll show you what this animation entails, so we'll click on that. And you can see here that our sample rate is just at 4 frames per second. And then we have the first keyframe, or the first frame, is changed to the other spring sprite that we've drawn, where the spring is stretched a little bit. And so you'll drag that into the first frame, and then you'll want to drag the other sprite, the default sprite, into the next 4 frames. So once you've done that, your animations are complete, and we'll show you now how to link them in your animator window. And so to do that, we'll go to Window and then click on Animator. And I've already brought it up. Let me just drag it over here. So this is what the animator window looks like. And you should, after you've created those animations, you'll have this entry and your exit, and then you'll have 2 states of animations. These are the animations that we've just... Now, idle spring is currently colored orange. That means that it's the default animation that will start playing as soon as our game starts. And so we want this to be the default animation, so we'll leave that. And you should currently also have this orange line already there. But if you don't, you can always right-click on the entry and then click on Make Transition and then click on Idle Spring. But you won't have these 2 arrows here. And so to create those, you'll right-click on one of your animations and then click on Make Transition, and then you'll see that this arrow appears, and you can click on the other one. But I don't need to do that because I've already created them. Now the next thing that you'll need to do is create a parameter. And so to do this, you'll click on this plus sign here, and we chose an integer parameter. And so you'll click on that, and then you get to rename it here, and we called it main character, but that might not actually be the best name. You could probably call it something with spring in it, like active spring or play animation spring or play spring animation. But we called it main character because the main character is what's going to trigger this integer to change, which will then play one of our animations. But once you've created this integer, we'll go ahead and click on the first transition between our idle spring and our spring bounce, and over here you can see the way that we've changed our setting. You'll probably have has exit time checked, and you want to make sure that for this transition that it's unchecked. And then you'll probably also have a transition duration, but we don't really need that because our sprites are just immediately changing back and forth. So you can go ahead and turn that to 0. Then you also need to make a condition. So if you don't have anything here, you'll click on this plus sign, and then you'll make sure that main character is selected, and you'll also want to change this to equals, and then we'll say 1. So you can see over here that our main character is currently set to 0. And so while it's set to 0, our animator will keep playing through the idle spring animation. And then as soon as this integer changes to 1, it'll start playing the spring bounce animation. And as soon as it's no longer 1, it'll go back to our idle spring. And that's where we get our next transition. So once you have all that set in your inspector, we'll click on this next transition, and you can see that we've left has exit time checked because as soon as the spring bounce is done playing, we want it to go back to our idle spring. And then we've changed our transition duration to 0, and we have no conditions. We just want it to go immediately back to idle spring as soon as it plays through spring bounce once. So once you have all that set up, you can go ahead and close your animator window. And now that we have the animations created and our spring created, we can go ahead and add the code that we need for our spring. So the first thing that you'll need to do is create a new spring script. And so you go to scripts folder, click on create, and then C#, and you can call it spring. We'll go ahead and open it in MonoDevelop. Once it's open in MonoDevelop, you can see that we've deleted our start and our update function, and then we've created a public animator variable, and we've called it spring animator, and then we created a void onTrigger enter 2D function, and the parameters are collider 2D, and we called it other, as we have in previous videos. And then you have one if statement inside, and that reads if other.tag is equal to feet, and so that is the tag that we assigned to the feet object of our box dude. Then we will say spring animator, so we'll call our animator variable, and then we'll say dot set integer, and then we'll call our main character integer, which is that same parameter that we created in our animator window, and then we'll set it equal to 1. And so this will set that transition. It'll make that transition from where it'll go from idle spring to spring bounce. Then we'll say start coroutine, and we created a new IE numerator called time to wait, and we say yield return new wait for seconds, and we put 0.75 seconds. Now the reason why we have 0.75 seconds is because that's the amount of time that it takes for our main character to play this. Okay. Now the reason why we have 0.75 seconds is because that's the amount of time that it will take for our spring to play through the spring bounce animation. And as soon as that's done, we'll want to change the main character parameter in our spring animator variable to 0. And that's so it'll stop looping through the idle spring and then the spring bounce and then back to the idle spring and then the spring bounce, and it'll just stay on the idle spring. And so this is the code that we need so that it'll only play through the spring bounce animation once per time that our main character lands on the spring. So once you have that, you can go ahead and save. So now we'll go to the main character feet script. We'll click on that, and there's quite a bit of code that we'll need to write in this script. So a couple of the variables that we'll need for the spring is we'll need to add a variable which is a public box collider 2D, and we'll call it feet box, and this is where we're going to put the box collider for our main character's feet, and that way we can toggle it on and off when our character is going up, because we don't want our main character to be mid-air and then run into another platform and get an additional boost. If that happens, then it won't look like he is jumping, it'll look more like he's flying through the air. And so we'll need that, and then we'll also need a public string, and we'll call it last jump, and these other variables I'll explain when we get into the jetpack and the propeller hat. And so there's a bit of code that we need to add to code that we've already written in our previous videos, so in our onTrigger enter 2D function. So some more code that we'll need to add to code that we've previously written is right here in the onTrigger enter 2D function. We currently have an if statement that says if other.tag is equal to platform, and we'll need to add a couple other or statements or conditions in there. So we'll say or other.tag equals spring or other.tag equals tramp. And so if our main character lands on a platform, a spring, or a tramp, then we're going to execute the code inside. So we're going to set is jumping equal to true, and then we're going to turn off our main character's feet box collider to false, and then our box dude rigid body, you already have this code. We're setting his gravity scale to 0, and then we're setting his velocity equal to 0 as well. And then I've added these if statements here and these else if statements. So the next if statement, we're just strictly checking whether or not the last object we ran into was platform. So we say if other.tag equals platform, then we set last jump equal to platform. That's where we're saving that string. Then we have an else if statement, which is if other tag equals spring, then we're setting it equal to spring, and so on with the trampoline. But I'll talk more about this if-else statement when we talk about the trampoline. Now on to our update function. For you probably just have the jump function written into the update function, and we need to add a couple conditions. So we need to say if controller dot is game over is equal to false and last jump is equal to platform, then we'll do the jump function, because the jump function was the script that we wrote just if our main character was strictly jumping on a platform. Then we'll need an if-else statement, and this is for the spring, and the following else-if statements I'll talk about when we get to the trampoline and the jetpack. So this if-else statement reads, if controller dot is game over is equal to false and last jump was equal to spring or is equal to spring, then we're going to do the spring function. Now let me show you what the spring function is. So I wrote it down below beneath our black hole function. So this function is a void function and it's got no parameters, and then inside it's really the same thing as the jump function. So here's the jump function that we wrote in a previous video, but the only difference is in our else if statement. So in our else if statement we're saying the same things. We're setting is jumping equal to false, and then this is new, we're changing our feet box, the box collider for our main character's feet, we're setting it back equal to true. So our main character doesn't have his box collider as he's going up, but as soon as he reaches the top of his jump, we're turning that box collider back on. Then we're going to start a new coroutine, and I've written it here. It's called spring wait time. So we say IEnumerator spring wait time, then we say yield return new wait for, and I said 0.25 seconds. Then once it's waited 0.25 seconds, we're going to turn on gravity. So boxdude rigidbody.gravity scale equals 1. And this will give it a longer hang time in the air for this spring jump. And so earlier I showed you the difference between when our box dude was jumping on the platform and when he jumped on the spring, and he had a little bit longer hang time in the air with the spring. And so this is the code that you need to do in order to create that hang time. So really the only differences between the jump function and the spring function is that hang time. And what's important to know is on the jump function we added in this feet box collider enable equals true, because we want that to happen every time our main character is jumping, whether he's landed on a platform or a spring or a trampoline or even a jetpack. So once you finish writing that code, you can go ahead and save it. And if I've gone too fast for you, if I've been just blazing through these because I'm not typing it out with you, you can go back and pause the video at any time and look at the code and study it. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. But once we save that, we'll go back to Unity, and a couple important things to do. You need to attach the spring script to your spring object that you will then save as prefab. And so if I click on our spring object, you can see here is our attached script, and the only variable that you'll need to drag in is the animator component of your spring. So to do that, you'll just click on your spring in the hierarchy and drag it into that field. Then you need to go to your feet script on your feet object, and you'll need to add the box collider 2D on your feet to this field here. So to do that, you'll click on your feet object and just drag it in right there. So I believe that's everything we need to do for our spring. Now, if you can't get it to work, you can always leave us comments below and we'll see if we can help you out. But once you've finished your spring, you can go ahead and drag it into your prefabs folder, but I won't do that because I've already created it as a prefab, and then you can go ahead and delete it from the scene. Now I'll go ahead and show you the trampoline real quick, and the trampoline is basically the same thing as the spring. And if you want to use the spring as the base of your trampoline, you can go ahead and do that. If you don't want to change anything, the only thing that you will have to change is the sprite and maybe the size, and then you also have to make animations for the trampoline because they require different images. But I'll go ahead and show you what we've created so far with the trampoline. So I'll drag it into the scene view, and then I'll go ahead and hit play, and I'll show you the difference between landing on the platform and landing on the trampoline. And this has a pretty cool feature. Yeah, how do you like that? So we've added a little animation on our main character so that when he lands on the trampoline, he does a front flip. So that's pretty cool. And then he also has a little bit more hang time. I believe it's about the same as the spring. So to create this trampoline, you'll go ahead and do the same couple steps that we did for the spring. The only difference is that you'll drag your trampoline sprite into the sprite renderer, and you'll make sure it's the right size, and you'll also name it trampoline and create a tag for it called trampoline. Then you'll have a box collider, and you'll need to create new animations for it. So I'll show you the animations that we created. We have one animation that's called tramp idle, and then we have another one called tramp bounce. And so it's the same thing. The sample rate is 1 frame per second, and then we just drag in the default image. And then for the tramp bounce, we did the same thing as well. We have the sample rate at 4, and then the first frame is our other image that we have for our trampoline, and then the following 4 frames are the standard image. Then you'll have to do the same thing and go into your animator window. I have it over here. And so you can see we have tramp idle and tramp bounce, and then we have our transitions, and we've created a parameter. It might be selected on layer and you can't see your parameters, but if you just click on the parameter tab, you'll be able to see it. And so you'll hit the plus sign, rename it, and you also want integer, just the same. And then you'll also need to change these transition settings in your inspector and make sure that the first one, the one going from idle to bounce, it doesn't have a has exit time, and it also has a duration of 0. And then the other one has an exit time and a duration of 0. Whoops, I need to change that. And then you also want to make sure that your first transition has that condition set where it's the main character and it equals 1. Once you have all that set up, you can go ahead and close your animator window. Now for the trampoline, we went ahead and just used the exact same script that we put on our spring onto our trampoline. So if I click on my trampoline, you can see here we have our spring script. So if you've now created it, you can go ahead and attach it to your trampoline and then drag in the trampoline animator component into this field here. And if you want, you can rename your script, but if you rename it here in the project window, you'll also have to rename the class name in MonoDevelop. But it's totally fine if you want to leave it as spring. That's what we've done. Now one more thing that we need to do before we start coding is we need to make the animation for our main character to do the front flip. And that's only if you really want to do that. If you don't want to, you can completely skip this step. But what you'll need to do is you'll need to create a child object to your box dude that is the sprite of your box dude. And what we'll be doing is we'll be moving the sprite renderer component from your box dude to this sprite object. So here you can see we have our sprite renderer and our Doodle Jump or our box dude sprite is attached. Now you should currently have an animation component attached to your box dude because we've created the black hole death animation, but you'll want to move that over to this sprite object and create a new animation for your main character to do a flip, and I'll show you what that is. So it's right here. We just created a new one, we saved it in our animation folder, and then for the first keyframe we have everything set to 0, and then on the second keyframe you can see that we've made one negative 360-degree turn in the Z axis. And that's all you need to do for that, and you will make sure that you drag your flip animation into this element 1 if it's not currently there. Now we can get on to the coding needed for the trampoline. So we'll go to MonoDevelop, and in your main character feat script there's one variable that you'll need to add, and it's the public game object boxDude sprite. Now the next thing that you'll need to do is in your onTriggerEnter2D function, below your else if other tag equals spring, you'll need to add an else if other tag is equal to tramp. And then you'll say last jump equals tramp, and underneath that you'll say boxDude.sprite.getComponent animation, and then parentheses, and say .play flip. And this will make it so your main character does a flip. Then in your update function, you'll need to add another else if statement. You'll say else if controller.isGameOver is equal to false and last jump is equal to tramp, then play or run the tramp function. And we're going to need to create the tramp function. And the tramp function is basically the same as the spring function and the jump function. The only difference is that we need to run a different coroutine or enumerator. So you'll say start coroutine and then tramp, that should be tramp wait time. And then below that we have our tramp wait time enumerator function, and you'll say yield return new wait 4 seconds and then 0.5f. And then after that you'll turn on gravity scale equal to 1. Now you're probably wondering why we need a different coroutine for our trampoline and our spring, and the difference is the wait time. And so I did say that I thought that the hang time for the spring and the trampoline were the same, but they're actually different. The hang time for the spring is 1/4 a second, and the hang time for the trampoline is 1/2 a second. But if you want to keep them the same, then all you have to do is you can skip writing this new enumerator function and just say start coroutine and then spring wait time, and it'll run through the enumerator for the spring function. So once you've written that, you can go ahead and save this script. And the last thing that we'll need to do is in our body script. So we'll go to our body script, and this is for debugging purposes. Because we changed the location of our animation component on our box dude, we'll need to create a new variable that's public game object box dude sprite, just like we have in our main character feat. And then where you play your black hole death animation, you'll need to change. You'll need to say, let's see, right here, you need to say box dude sprite dot get component and then animation parentheses dot play black hole death. And that will fix it so that you don't get any errors because of that change that we made. So you can go ahead and save that, and then we'll go back to Unity, and then you'll need to drag in everything that you have a variable for. So on our feat script, we now have this box dude sprite, and you'll need to drag in the sprite object into that field. Then on our body script, you'll need to drag that same sprite object into the box dude sprite field, and that should be everything that we need for the trampoline. So you can go ahead and drag your trampoline object into your prefabs folder and then go ahead and delete your trampoline object from your scene.
Hey, so we only did 2 item pickups today, and the game has quite a few more item pickups. And so stay tuned for those upcoming videos.
Yeah, they should be pretty straightforward, pretty fun, and you'll get to learn a bunch of cool codes. So make sure that you subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
Eat.